Good evening, Western Standard viewers, and welcome to Hannaford, a weekly politics show. I'm Nigel Hannaford. It is Thursday, February the 26th, and in Alberta, it is Budget Day. My guest today is Peter Piovic, a Calgary-based senior portfolio manager at Wellington Altus Private Wealth Canada. Welcome back to the show, Peter.
Nigel, thank you very much for having me here again.
Peter, a few hours ago, the Alberta government dropped its budget, and Finance Minister Horner confirmed what we have been expecting, a large deficit, $9.3 billion, and quite a lot of other headline news that we didn't really want to hear, like more deficits in the future. Peter, welcome to the show. Perhaps you can explain this to us.
Thank you. So what do you think, Nigel? Does this sound like a doom and gloom budget?
Well, that was my question for you, because anytime there's a deficit, perhaps I'm just projecting from my own finances onto the province, but it always feels terrible when the outgoings exceed the incomings. But government financing is a different kind of thing. So does this really change anything about the fundamental strengths or weaknesses of the Alberta economy? You're advising people on where to invest their money. Is Alberta still good?
Very much so. I did listen to the beginning of the budget address by Minister Horner. He did seem a little bit conciliatory, in his tone. But the reality of it is there's a lot to look forward to. I mean, myself, I moved to Alberta for a reason 4 years ago.
You were in Winnipeg, were you?
Yes, I was in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and I moved to Alberta for many of the same reasons that many others moved to Alberta. That it's one of the best, if not the best place in the country, really, if you're seeking, what would you call it, economic prosperity or opportunities in general. And I don't really see anything changing from that in this budget. So just to look at a few things. First of all, deregulation, both in the United States and Canada, even federally, and in Alberta as well. We're going through a deregulation cycle, or where regulations are being looked at, and it's being addressed as to how efficient or inefficient those regulations are, and are they helping or hurting the economy. And certainly the push right now is to make things better and run smoother. And it's quite well known that many projects have not gotten off the ground, both in Alberta and many other parts of Canada, due to basically an overly heavy regulatory environment. And I think there's a consciousness right now that needs to change. And Alberta is probably at the spearhead of that. So that's why we
just ask you about that regulatory environment. Much of it has to do with imposing a green orthodoxy on the energy industry.
Yes.
So you can make the case that some of these things, like containing methane leaks, are just a good thing to do anyway. Mm-hmm. But when it becomes such a burden to the industry that is starting to affect production and people's willingness to invest, what have you seen in deregulation that gives you hope?
Well, first of all, there's a bit of order. If you look at the MOU that was recently signed, there's a lot more clarity in terms of the direction that they're going with respect to, say, carbon capture and also industrial carbon taxes. So while we may not all like what we heard there, at least we have some certainty and some clarity in terms of the direction that they're going, for starters. And there's been, like I said before, multiple examples of projects just simply not getting off the ground due to excessive regulation, or approvals that just took, essentially way too long, for them to come to fruition. And some of those projects ended up going to the US. So at least we have an awareness of that right now. And I do believe change is coming, but it's not really just, regulations. Like, there's opportunities here, for the federal government with respect to tariff negotiations and negotiating a new trade deal in the US that, if done correctly, could end up helping things in the next year to 2 years. With respect to Alberta, we're in the middle of bringing up discussions on, say, equalization payments, for example, and federal transfer payments, which, again, no guarantees, but there's an opportunity there for possibly Alberta to negotiate a more favorable deal. Put it another way, we saw that $9 billion plus deficit right now, but what would the deficit be if we weren't paying so much in equalization payments as a collective society, not the government? Of course, the government doesn't pay directly to the federal government for transfers, but the people of Alberta and the business of Alberta do. So I would hazard a guess that it may not be 9 billion plus. It'd be something less than that, if not even zero. So there's opportunities there.
Well, what is considered to be a reasonable guess at the cost of equalization to Alberta? I think it's pretty high.
It's quite high. So if it depends if you're looking at just equalization or total, let's call it transfers or transfers of wealth outside of Alberta. And of course, these estimates can vary year by year. They're not the same every year, and they're always a moving target. But if you look at, say, total transfers or total wealth net that are leaving Alberta per year, probably in the neighborhood of 12, 13, 14 billion dollars a year. And again, that comes from people and Alberta businesses. If you look at specifics to how much of that goes to equalization, of which the majority of that will go to Quebec, but not just Quebec, other eastern provinces and so forth, it's probably in that $4 to $5 billion range.
Right.
Yeah. So that's a net loss of wealth leaving the province that's going elsewhere. And I think the intent is good. You want to share in the wealth to some degree across Canada, but some problems can arise from that. So, for example, if certain provinces are, say, receiving equalization for free, essentially, and that now disincentivizes them to develop their own natural gas resources. So, for example, Quebec, has tremendous ability to generate resource extraction. So does New Brunswick. There's shale gas opportunities there, and many other provinces. But maybe the incentive is not quite there if they're receiving Alberta equalization.
So these are things that are hopeful. They're not baked in.
No,
they are
opportunities.
They are opportunities. The fundamentals of Alberta, like where we make our money, the size and skills of our workforce, they haven't changed, but there's not enough. So what are the opportunities on the cost-cutting side when you have massive increases in immigration into the province?
Okay, so the cost-cutting would be, let's call it a controversial topic, because there's a percentage of government spending that's actually attributed to GDP. Okay, and this is actually a good news story for Alberta. You can measure province by province, across the country, and basically ask the question. It's like, okay, that province has, X amount of GDP. How much of that GDP is directly attributed to government spending? And in the case of Alberta, it's the lowest in the country by far.
Really?
Yeah. Really, yeah. It's there are some provinces where that number could be 30%, 40%, or even more than 40%. Without naming the provinces, of course. In Alberta, I think I have the number here somewhere, but I believe it's in that 20 percentile range. It's low. It's substantially lower than other provinces. So we're already pretty lean with respect to that as a percentage of GDP. And then, but keep in mind, when you cost cut, there is also a hit to GDP. In the case of Alberta, that hit is lower because it has a lower attribution of government spending to GDP.
I think a province such as Alberta would be more attractive to investors if they have a low government investment in the economy.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't want to invest in
It's a private sector economy.
Private sector economy.
Yeah.
So
not a public sector economy. Alberta is a private sector economy predominantly, more than other provinces.
Amen, and long may it last. So, okay, I am prepared to accept at face value the finance minister's line that the difficulties they face this year are a consequence of low oil prices and of very high levels of in-migration. Saying in-migration rather than immigration because, it can be people like you who are moving in
Yeah.
And you bring all your children with you, and
Yeah.
now we need a school in Northwest Calgary.
Yeah.
No, seriously, Peter, if that's if we have a growing economy, why do we not have a growing tax base? How much of this is really immigration? How much is it oil is depressed?
I would say the majority is, I mean, without looking at the details of the numbers, you and I both just, they were a very short look at the budget. I'd say mostly it's oil prices. Yeah, there sure some could be attributed to immigration, however you want to call it, but it's an offset again. I moved here, 4 years ago from Manitoba. A lot of immigrants that come to Alberta are paying taxes. Some are not. So it really comes down to the proportion of the immigration that's coming in. Are they economic migrants or the other types of migrants? So it might come down to, call it a quality over quantity argument.
So I guess what I want to know is how big a problem is this? I mean, we have got inflation locked into the economy. So if we say we've got a $9 billion deficit today, that's probably like a $6 billion deficit 10 years ago. Well, not to be quoted, but these things do matter. And $60 oil today, what would that have been 10 years ago in terms of real purchasing power?
Yeah.
So if when I look at my bank account, I see what you're saying. Investments are higher numbers, but they don't buy what they bought 10 years ago. So is this as bad as it looks?
No, it's not. So again, so what you're referring to is specifically monetary inflation as opposed to necessarily just looking at CPI. CPI is part of it, but it's definitely more of a monetary inflation argument. So to your point, $9 billion today, if you look at it 10 years ago, it's not $9 billion. It's something less than that. We have to do the math in terms of what the exact numbers are, but you're probably not far off, in your estimate. So, but that also is attributable to GDP as well. So GDP over time, part of that increase in GDP is actually also attributed to monetary inflation. So it kind of goes both ways. That's why it's really important to look at GDP ratios, whether it's net to GDP ratios or net GDP ratios or gross GDP ratios. And in either case, actually, Alberta, by far has the lowest debt to GDP ratios in Canada. So despite the budget that we just seen, we are still far ahead of any other province in the country in terms of either net debt to GDP ratio or even gross debt to GDP ratio.
So what roughly would be our gross debt to GDP ratio?
It's in the budget documents. It's in that 8th percentile. Sorry, not the gross. They quote the net they quote the net in the budget. It's in that let's call it 8.5, 8.7 range. The one thing I did see briefly in the budget document that just got released a short time ago is they are projecting that net debt to GDP ratio to rise over the next 3 years from in that 8th percentile range up to 10, 11, and 12.
So what would be the GDP to deficit ratio for the federal government?
So it's higher.
Yeah, well, I think it's vastly higher.
It's vastly higher. It's significantly higher, but just to compare it to other provinces. So Saskatchewan is around 15%, currently. Now that will be the next closest one. British Columbia is around 26%, a little bit over. Ontario is around 37%. Quebec's around 40%. So, once again, we're not really in a bad place. And if you look at gross ratios, debt to GDP, Alberta is again the lowest at around 30%. Nova Scotia is closer to 40. British Columbia is above 40. Quebec's at 83, and Manitoba is also at 83. So,
your old home.
Well, yes, all right, yes, it is.
So, when you advise clients, they're looking at an investment in Alberta, I say, well, you guys are running deficits. Who's running the show there? Do these people have a sure, they have a low debt to GDP ratio today. What was it 10 years ago? Are they getting worse? Are they getting better? Cannot confidently place my money in Alberta with the expectation that the place is not going to go broke.
Yes, we are nowhere near the debt to GDP ratios, whether it's net or gross, to the point where there's any discussion whatsoever about going broke, and far away from that.
Mm-hmm.
And while nobody, including myself, likes the fact that, let's just say, we might be going in the wrong direction somewhat, in terms of both the net debt to GDP ratio and also net debt, and the deficit, arising. Nobody really wants to see that necessarily, but we're still financially in a better position relatively than other Canadian provinces. And on top of that as well, like just looking into the future, if you think it through, we're going through, there's different names for them. Some people might call it a fourth turning, or some people might want to call it, let's just say, a lot of change that's happening in the economy, whether it's due to artificial intelligence that's coming to the forefront, or whether it's deglobalization, let's just say, and reshoring and manufacturing to North America. All those things are happening. AI is happening. The reshoring is happening. A focus on manufacturing is happening. But with that, that manufacturing needs energy, lots and lots and lots of energy. And look where we live. We have lots and lots of energy, natural gas and oil, and in the budget as well, there were provisions for the development of nuclear as well on top of that. And so we could play a pivotal role in this shift towards having, let's just say, more industrial capacity and manufacturing within North America. We can play a pivotal role for that transition. Call it deglobalization, given the amount of energy and natural resources that we have, to the point that could, really make this a wonderful place to live for decades to come.
A strange thing, for decades we've been talking about globalization as a good thing, and now you can casually drop into a sentence the word deglobalization with confident expectation that everybody's,
right,
good idea by the time we did that.
Yeah. Well, it's complicated, but things are changing. What can change that is a few wars. So if you have a few wars where all of a sudden, let's just say that we're running out of ammunition in those wars, to the point, and the reason we're running out is because we can't produce enough on our own without asking others, for that production, who may not want to give it to us.
Okay, well, that is a harder thing to predict, and heaven help us. I hope it stays that way. So Alberta, the fundamentals in Alberta remain strong.
They remain very strong,
and you would advise people to continue to put their money here. I was struck by the fact that there's no reported contributions to the Heritage Fund.
Yes.
I can sort of see that you don't put money into your TFSA when you're struggling to pay your visa bill.
Yes.
If I can use that as an analogy. But are there any costs to breaking step in that policy? Would they have been advised to keep it on?
So potentially. I did read a quick excerpt in the budget document that the rationale there is that the rate of return of the Heritage Fund on its own, so with no additional contributions to the Heritage Fund, that the province of Alberta will reach their targets for the Heritage Fund by 2050. So in a way, you might just do one of these, saying we don't have to do anything, we can just let it grow and it'll get there. However, and it is a however with that, is there's a risk in that too as well. You're now relying on that rate of return to continue being what it currently is. And if it isn't for whatever reason, then that may not hold true. But that's even just looking at it from a financial perspective. The fund, from what I can tell, is invested primarily in financial assets. Other thing I may want to bring up is other reserve funds in other parts of the world, including down in the United States, It's not just a financial fund, so to speak. They in these reserve funds, they hold assets, call it minerals. It could be gold, it could be silver, it could be copper, it could be uranium, it could be basically, think of it this way: things that the economy may need in the future, whether it's for industrial output, manufacturing, or some sort of a monetary base. It doesn't necessarily all have to revolve around, like looking at it just like an investment fund.
Of course, we look at the projected goal of I think it's $250 billion.
I believe that's what it was. Yeah, I have it written down or something around there.
What $250 billion is going to look like in 24 years time. You've got the same confidence out of that big number that you have today. It's like when you're planning retirement when you're 25.
Right. Especially adjusted for inflation. How much is that really?
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, if you had the premier's ear, would you say maybe expand the targets a little?
I would say if I had the premier's ear to, and obviously it's not wrong the way it's being done now necessarily, but there is an argument to be had or a discussion to be had, let's just say, but what does Alberta need in the next 20, 30 years? What does the economy of Alberta need? And what of that they need might, for whatever reason, come into shortage? And if it does come into shortage, should we not, let's stockpile some of it, or at least have that available to the economy of Alberta in the future? Or another argument would be, what happens to money, let's just say, or how money is valued over the next 20, 25 years, and it's uncertain. So possibly diversifying a bit away from simply financial assets might be something they want to think about.
Yes. What does that actually look like? Could you actually find an old reservoir and pump all the oil back into it? Is that the sort of strategic reserve you're talking about?
I believe the United States has, I don't know the exact number, but it's something north of 20 commodities that they classify as a strategic reserve. A lot of people don't really know that, but they do. So they're thinking ahead in terms of what the economy might need. But it could be something as simple as, like I said, stockpiling potentially gold and silver as monetary assets, in addition to financial assets that are already there, and also industrial metals, copper, other industrial metals, possibly uranium, especially if we're thinking of incorporating nuclear reactors into our energy base in the next 10, 15, 20 years, maybe having some uranium in storage to fuel those reactors would reduce the risk, let's just say, of having to buy it at a higher price 10 years from now.
One of the I'm picturing these warehouses full of copper ingots.
Yep.
Well, yes. Until you've refined it, you don't really know what you got, do you?
Right.
So I'm picturing this economy that we're building here that is going to be different in kind. Mm-hmm. You made the point about the fourth turning and the end of globalization and so on. Are we right to think then that in 10, 15 years' time, Alberta is going to be doing the same things as it is now? Once we did cows. That's why we all, have the cowboy hats in July. Then we did oil. Are we going to be doing oil forever?
I could imagine we'd be doing oil for a very long time.
Okay.
Well into the next century. However, that doesn't mean that that's the only thing we would do. I can foresee a future where we're still, we still have lots of oil, lots of natural gas, but we have other sources of energy as well, including nuclear, and who knows what's going to be invented in the next, 50 to 75 years.
Who saw AI coming? So we keep doing what we're doing.
Yep.
And we keep trying to resist the higher wages in, I guess, let's face it, 80% of what they spend is in wages, and most of it is in education and health. At the same time as we have an expanding population and falling oil prices, stay the course and tough it out, times will change and times will get better.
Times will get better. They're really not that bad at the end of the day, even today. But of course, I believe there's, and this is one of the things that makes Alberta great. There's this wonderful attitude in Alberta where, because things have been so well due to let's call it the entrepreneurial and hardworking appetite of Albertans, our expectation level is so much higher than it is in other places. And as soon as we just misstep a little bit, there's questions about, is this the end, so to speak? But that's, I'll look at that as a positive rather than a negative.
What about a sales tax?
Oh, that's a complicated one. So I'll answer it really quickly this way. So a sales tax without a commensurate reduction in income tax, I would say, is a very bad idea. At the end of the day, you're removing wealth from Albertans and you're removing their ability to spend that wealth into the economy. And you're also creating issues to attract capital to Alberta, from that. If the sales tax is commensurate with a tax deduction, so that it's either net neutral or a net benefit, then it's something that could be discussed. But it shouldn't be just looked at as a quick smash and grab, let's say.
I cannot imagine a government that would be faithful to any promise this is just a straight switch. Pretty soon this one will be back up again.
That's a concern.
And it's, pick your politicians carefully, but pick your province, and Alberta is the place. That's, on that note, I think we should wrap it up.
I would agree.
Yes.
And I like the no sales tax, here in Alberta, by the way.
Yes. Personally. Yes. It was one of the reasons made me come here.
Exactly.
The only one. But anyway, Peter, thank you so much for coming in today. It's been really good to get the investment advisor's perspective on a provincial budget as we go through uncertain times.
Yes.
Easy to panic. It takes a little more discipline to just see the thing through.
Thanks, Nigel.
Peter, thank you.
Thank you.
For the Western Standard, I'm Nigel Hannaford.